US President Donald Trump risks making a historical mistake if the United States recognizes Russia's claims to Crimea and other occupied Ukrainian territories. This warning came from Paweł Kowal, an advisor to the Polish Prime Minister on Ukrainian affairs. Kowal reminded that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Russian Federation recognized Ukraine's borders, including Crimea and the Donbass, in accordance with international law.
There is a clear difference between temporary ceasefire arrangements in Ukraine and fulfilling Russia's expectations to recognize Crimea, Donbass, or other parts of Ukraine. That would be a historic mistake. From the standpoint of precedent, allowing Putin to expand an imperial Russia would be disastrous. Paweł Kowal, chairman of the Council for Cooperation with Ukraine, in an interview with the Financial Times.
Kowal expressed confidence that Donald Trump ultimately will not allow Russia to legally control Ukrainian territory and will instead acknowledge the ongoing threat posed by Putin. In mid-March 2025, U.S. National Security Advisor Michael Waltz suggested that a future agreement to end Russia's war against Ukraine could involve Ukraine giving up some territory in exchange for future security guarantees. However, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy responded firmly, saying that recognizing any occupied Ukrainian territories as Russian would cross a red line Ukraine is not willing to accept.
From a geopolitical standpoint, we will never recognize any territories occupied by Russia as Russian. These are Ukrainian territories, always. For us, that is a red line. In any case, they are temporarily occupied. A just peace will only come when these territories are returned.
According to a 2025 forecast by the U.S. Office of the Director of National Intelligence, Russia is using its battlefield position and political maneuvering to push for greater concessions from both Ukraine and the West during talks to end the war. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War believe that the Russian dictator is likely more willing to risk a prolonged conflict than accept any outcome that is unfavorable for the Kremlin.
Russia seeks to leverage ongoing ceasefire and future peace negotiations to seize large amounts of territory in Ukraine and install a pro-Russian puppet government in Kyiv, but will likely continue military operations in Ukraine if the Kremlin is unable to achieve a full Ukrainian surrender through diplomacy, from the report by the Institute for the Study of War.
At the end of March, President Trump vowed to impose secondary sanctions on all Russian oil if Moscow obstructs a ceasefire in Ukraine. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, speaking after a meeting of NATO foreign ministers in Brussels, said that if Russian forces launch a new offensive in Ukraine, it will clearly indicate whether they are serious about peace.
We will know soon enough, in a matter of weeks, not months, whether Russia is serious about peace or not. I hope they are. It would be good for the world if this war ended, but we have to test that. That's why we're working on the process. I believe the Ukrainians have shown a willingness to enter, for example, into a complete ceasefire to create space for negotiations. Marco Rubio, United States Secretary of State.
However, experts say the Kremlin remains committed to prolonging any talks about a ceasefire. Putin, they argue, is least interested in freezing the war along current front lines.
He hasn't changed his demands since November. They even amended their legislation to include Ukrainian territories in their constitution. But time has run out, and now the gap between their words and actual actions is becoming obvious.
According to the expert, the US and EU can force Russia toward peace through further sanctions, measures that would hit the aggressor state's economy even harder, making it increasingly difficult for Russia to continue waging war. Reported by Serhiy Kulas, Natalia Husak, Volodymyr Shnangelov, UATV News.
Putin is openly bullying the United States, and the disagreements between Washington and Brussels have only played into the hands of the Kremlin, said Andrius Kubilius in an interview with Lithuanian national television. At the same time, the European Commissioner for Defense and Space believes that the initially sharp international policy of Donald Trump's administration is gradually shifting towards a deeper understanding of reality. This view is also shared by several other European politicians.
We can see that the Americans are trying to reach a peace agreement. Sometimes it seems that they have to go through these lessons from Putin to truly understand who he is. In my opinion, Putin is currently just openly mocking the Americans. One good thing is that when the Americans began behaving differently, when there was more sincerity in our relations, Europeans were moved. Now we see much more of the right and necessary efforts to unite and demonstrate our leadership. Andrius Kubilius, the European Commissioner for Defense and Space, in an interview with Lithuanian national television. A few weeks ago, Ukraine agreed to an unconditional ceasefire, while Russia continues to commit war crimes. And I believe that today, Russia must give the United States a clear answer, whether it wants to pursue peace or not.
The United States will have to impose additional tariffs on Russian oil if the Kremlin fails to fulfill the ceasefire agreement. This was stated by Donald Trump, who added that he still believes that the dictator Putin will play by the rules. Previously, on March 30th, in an interview with NBC, Trump said that he was very angry with Putin for suggesting that Ukraine should have new leadership.
No, I want to see him make a deal so that we stop Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers and other people from being killed. And I wanted to stop. And some people would say, why do you worry about Russian soldiers or Ukrainian soldiers? I worry because it's like they're just like you people. They're like us. They're like all of us. And I seem to have an ability to do those things. And if I can do that, I think it's a very worthwhile thing to do. And I think we will. No, I want to make sure that he follows through.
The U.S. president has also mentioned that he calls a psychological deadline for when Washington will stop expecting Russia to fulfill the terms of the ceasefire. We cannot allow ourselves to be dragged into Putin's tactic of Stalin, stated Minister of Foreign Affairs of Germany Annalena Baerbock, who said that she is ready to remind American partners of this.
A ceasefire on Putin's terms will not end the war. It will only be a prelude to the next offensive. Therefore, I would like to emphasize that there will be no end to European sanctions without peace. Our response to Putin's war is peace through strength, peace through European unity and resolve.
Meanwhile, the president of Finland suggested to his American counterpart that a deadline be set for Moscow April 20th. Additionally, according to Alexander Stubb, Donald Trump is running route of patience with Russia. Analysts at the Institute for the Study of War are doubtful that the Kremlin will agree to a ceasefire in the coming weeks.
Russia is unlikely to agree to a full ceasefire without any conditions within 3 weeks, given that Russia has demanded that the West provide some sanctions relief as a precondition for a temporary Black Sea ceasefire. The Kremlin stated on March 25th that it will not implement the agreed ceasefire in the Black Sea until the United States lifts sanctions on Russian state-owned agricultural bank, Rosalkazbank, and other unspecified financial organizations, from the Institute for the Study of War report.
U.S. House of Representatives Republican member Don Bacon is confident that in recent weeks many Republicans, including Trump, have treated Russia with velvet gloves, shying away from calling out Mr. Putin's flatly illegal war. Reported by Alexander Zaslavich, Larissa Petruk, UATV News.